Think back to your childhood. Did you ever steal a candy bar or something small from a store? And if you did and got caught by your parents, what did they do? They most likely made you go back to the store, return it, and apologize, right? They didn't take it away, drive home, and say that you couldn't go back to the grocery store for a few weeks or maybe even ever, right? So why can't we treat the kids in our schools the same way? Can't it just be that simple? I've always been against punitive policies in schools. As a teacher and as a person, strict punishments are just not my style. I believe in talking through problems and encouraging empathy and compassion in my peers and students. Last year, I had the incredible opportunity of working with these students in a school in Ferguson, Missouri. That experience taught me that there are communities that are drastically different from where I was raised. But if anything, that means that these students need more love, care, and attention. My research has shown me how changes need to be made not only with individual teachers, but at the larger systemic level as well. I believe that moving from zero tolerance policies to restorative justice will reduce the suspension inequality among students of color, males, and students from low income households. First, it's important to understand why this is even an issue that relates to race, gender, and class specifically. According to data collected by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights in 2013-2014, Black K 12 students are 3.8 times more likely than their white peers to receive one or more out of school suspensions. One could assume that this just means that students of color misbehave more than white students. But in her article, Race, Gender, and the School to Prison Pipeline, expanding our discussion to include black girls, Monique Morris quotes another study that states, observed patterns of racial disproportion do not correlate with higher incidence of disruptive behavior by black students, and therefore conclude that disproportionate minority contact in school discipline is due in part to differential treatment of students of color by teachers and administrators. Boys make up 51% of students enrolled in schools, yet they account for 72% of suspensions. Students from low-income households are about 1.75 times as likely as non-low-income students to be suspended. Clearly, our school systems are unfairly targeting these students. Zero-tolerance policies in schools are set up to allow for this inequality. In a school with a zero-tolerance policy, when an undesirable behavior is exhibited, there is a specific punishment that the student receives. Usually, this will be a detention, suspension, or expulsion, all of which isolate the student either inside or outside of school. So what can we do to fix this? It starts with changing our mindset. As teachers, we need to recognize the good behavior just as much as we recognize the bad behavior. Even in the most poorly behaved child, the good decisions are not as rare as you might think. Any time that a student follows directions, acknowledge it. When a student raises their hand before asking a question, acknowledge it. If we acknowledge good behavior more often than the bad, we teach our kids that we want them to succeed. But when a quote-unquote troubled or bad student only ever hears don't, or else, they are learning that this school is not a safe place for them. Of course, encouraging good behavior cannot completely get rid of the bad behavior. But how can we change the way we handle these instances instead of jumping straight to suspension? Restorative justice focuses on correcting behavior through discussion and behavior plans designed specifically for the individual student. When an instance occurs in a classroom that would normally result in a suspension, that student is removed from the classroom and the teacher works with them to discuss their behavior. Then the student is put on a specific behavior plan to be implemented in the classroom. The rest of the students are also encouraged to talk about the situation. They aren't taught to think anything less of the student who misbehaved, and they learn empathy and compassion. To see how restorative justice can be implemented in schools, we can look to an organization called Restorative Response Baltimore. This organization partners with schools in the area to introduce them to restorative practices and shift the overall culture and climate of schools from punitive to restorative, all while focusing on student wholeness. One day, at a middle school in Westside Baltimore, a fight broke out between two students. A woman in the neighborhood heard the commotion, ran to her porch, yelled, "I'm calling the police," and the fight broke up. The next day, a trained facilitator contacted each of the families to prepare for a conference with other community members. 15 people formed a circle with these two students, and they began to tell their story. Each one opened up about their struggles at home and apologized for taking it out on the other student. The guidance counselor said, "The truth is, these boys are popular, and everyone looks up to them, so we need them to set the right example." Immediately, smiles filled the room. The two boys shook hands and considered the issue squashed. Today, they play on the same basketball team, No scuffles, no incidents, just good sportsmanship. These two boys not only learned from their mistakes, but were encouraged to talk about their emotions, and most importantly, they did not miss a day in school. If we move from zero tolerance policies to restorative justice, we teach kids that we want them in school, we want them to succeed, and we believe in them. As teachers, it is our job to help kids learn and grow, whatever stage in life they're at. So let's actually do that. Kids don't suspend themselves. Kids make mistakes, and adults do the suspending. But we don't have to. If we focus on our behavior, give them the tools that they need to regulate theirs, see the potential in all our kids, listen to their stories, look for what's good and special in every single child, we can keep them in school and make sure that they know that at the end of the day, the place that they spend 7 hours at 5 days a week is on their side.